All right, we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this evening. I'm Elena Best. I'm the Membership and Development Associate at the Museum of Design Atlanta. At MODA, we define design as a creative force that inspires change, transforms lives, and makes the world a better place. And it's always been our mission to bring more design to our community because we believe that design makes a difference. And because design has such a power to change the world, we wanted to make sure that we kept talking about it during the COVID-19 pandemic. So one of the things that we did was we created Drink and Design. It's a virtual space for designers and people who love design to come together and hear from one another. And today we're speaking with Jasmine Burton. Jasmine is a social inclusion and design specialist, and she's also the founder of Wish for Wash. So I'm grateful to you for spending this time with us, Jasmine, and I'm also grateful to all of you for signing on this evening. Feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat box. Just tell us your name and where you're from. And there will also be a Q&A section at the end, and we'll get to as many questions as time allows. So all that being said, I will go ahead and pass it on to Jasmine.
All right. Hi, everyone. All right. Hey, everyone. I am grateful to be with y'all this evening. Thank you so much for those of you who are joining us for the second go round of this. Last time we had some tech problems, but I'm hoping this time we will have no issues. But yeah, just as another brief introduction, so I'm Jasmine, an Atlanta native, a Georgia Tech grad, and I'm really excited to talk about my journey in the social impact design space, particularly as it relates to global sanitation. So let's go ahead and get started. So I want to kick us off with the question, what is WASH? So in a lot of social impact spaces these days, the world is sort of referring to this series of colorful boxes, the United Nations 17 Sustainable Development Goals. They were created in 2015, and it's basically a series of targets and indicators to help the world kind of move progressively in terms of poverty, in terms of hunger, in terms of all these different ailments that are currently plaguing our world. And it's really just a way to sort of track countries against the various metrics of success. And so kind of based on that framework, this is sort of a little bit of a deep dive if you're interested in learning a little bit more about it. But based on that framework, I'm in my work is really interested in Sustainable Development Goal 6, clean water and sanitation. And basically this goal seeks to ensure the availability and sustainable management of water and sanitation for all. So this is something that I think, perhaps people in our, current realities are seeing more of in light of COVID, just how important clean water and sanitation is in terms of disease prevention, but it's definitely something that has, cascading implications in terms of the way that you live and kind of move through the world. And so WASH, in terms of the definition of the word, it's water, sanitation, and hygiene. So that's sort of the acronym. And kind of just shedding some light on reality. So a lot of people drink water that look like this, so very polluted. People use toilets that look like this, holes in the ground that are often unsustainable and pretty gross. And people use sinks that look like this, not a very high quality image, but basically sinks that have no water and are, abandoned and, not actually providing the service that they're intended to provide. And so you're like, cool, great, thanks for that. Like, who are you though? So let's get into that. So again, I'm Jasmine, and I founded an organization called Wish for Wash, and we seek to bring innovation to sanitation through culturally specific research, design, and education. And our growing mission is to bring more diverse minds, talents, and innovation to the problems of global health and WASH in our world through these three lenses, because everybody poops. So this idea of sort of meaningful engagement of diverse people and perspectives is something that's really central to the work that I do as a social inclusion specialist, and is really central to the way that Wish for Wash operates. And yeah, through all of this, human-centered design or design thinking has been really integral to the way that we do our programming, and the way that we approach product design, and the way that we approach innovation and development at large. And so I know, depending on where you were trained, if you're a designer, there's lots of schools of thought for design thinking. So at Georgia Tech, I was trained more with an IDEO framework, where we, start with inspiration, where you're really seeking to understand the problem. talk to a series of users, research, lots of desk research, really just be inspired by kind of what problems exist. And then moving into the ideation phase, figuring out sort of solution generating. Now that you understand the problem, you've talked to a bunch of diverse stakeholders, this is usually the phase where lots of sticky notes are involved. And then you move into implementation. So you sort of synthesize on some solutions, you synthesize on some ideas, and you put something in the real world in front of real users and get real feedback. And then based on that feedback, you iterate. So you're changing with this user-centered approach. So this is sort of the framework that my story is based off of, and Wish for Wash's story, as well as all of our work, is sort of based around. So in 2010, I was a freshman at Georgia Tech, and I was inspired by this woman, Susan Davis, also a Georgia Tech alumna. And she was speaking at the Georgia Tech Women's Leadership Conference, and basically she said that, sanitation is a story that's often untold. It tends to be the elephant in the room during conversations about global issues, and it's silenced by cultural taboos and disgust, despite the fact that, of the 7 billion people in our world today, everybody poops, right? So that's like the truest statistic. But, over half of the world doesn't have access to safely managed sanitation, which is a really disturbing reality if you think about it. Over 1 billion people openly defecate, which means they go to the bathroom in full view of other people, which leads to a host of both mental and physical health problems. The world spends a ton of money, $260 billion, actually might be more now in light of COVID, for wash-related sicknesses each year. So it's a really it's a burden on economies. And these are largely preventable illnesses. And it also costs the lives of over 4,000 children every day. So this is a large problem that affects people everywhere in the world. So kind of getting a grasp on that reality, we've then moved into this phase of what exists. So looking at precedents, looking at inspiration in terms of people that are operating in the space. Sanovation also came out of Georgia Tech and Emory. And they basically turn human waste into briquettes for cooking. So it's kind of this upcycle circular approach. So how might we kind of create systems that enable, human waste to be generative products and not just something that's flushed away, particularly in a resource constrained world that we're in. So a really cool model, and they're doing fantastic work in Kenya. Pipu, they're based in Sweden, I believe. They have this biodegradable bag, basically for if you're in a humanitarian situation or if you don't have any infrastructure at all. This bag enables people to just go to the bathroom in it, and you can sort of bury it, and then it decomposes naturally. So it's sort of in humanitarian situations, it's a good toilet option. This clean waste toilet is something that is like a camping toilet. So if you've ever seen any of these portable carrier toilet as you're camping or hiking models, this is one of them. Mosan, she's a product designer that is based in Switzerland, and her product design mantra is really about dignity, which I also believe very strongly in. You might not realize, but toilets do provide us with a lot of dignity and purpose and value in our lives. And, enabling people, of all socioeconomic statuses and from all backgrounds and cultures to have that same experience in terms of a dignified toilet experience is something that's really central to her design. Luwad is also a product designer. She's based in London, and they have a really cool toilet where basically it self-seals, so there's no water. So if you're in an area where there's no water, and she also works at music festivals, which is really cool. So basically you go to the bathroom and the bag self-seals. So if you're a waste management person, you don't have to come in contact with waste at all. You just pick up these bags, and it makes your jobs dignified and humane as well, which I think is really fantastic. And then Sanergy, they're based in Nairobi, Kenya, and they do a ton of things, but one of their claims to fame is this franchise model. So making it so toilet innovation is accessible in slum areas. And how do you create buy-in to business models so that it can be sustainable in terms of a revenue generating opportunity where someone then is pouring back into the toilet for communities to use. So these are some things that we identified at the beginning of this toilet journey of Wish for Wash. We then talked to 50 plus stakeholders across all of these different organizations. And we noticed a couple of gaps. So we noticed that there's not a ton of squat toilets. So squatting, if you just think about like gravity is actually, healthier for you and just the way the anatomy works. when you're going to the bathroom. And it's also a cultural preference for a lot of people, or just a, preference in terms of, what you just like to do, even if it's not culturally ingrained. So squatting is definitely something where there's not a ton of products that are readily available right now. There's not a ton of options that are made personal or modular. So if you live in a household with people of different abilities, or if you're, pregnant, or if you break your leg, how does that affect your toilet experience? And there's not a ton of options right now where you can sort of make your toilet fit the needs that you're currently walking through, or the people in your household. Crisis relief is really limited. I know PPU is doing the bag, but in terms of just like refugee camps or crises, there's a ton of opportunity for innovation there. And then cost effectiveness. So things that are low cost, particularly for resource constrained communities. So fast forward a few years, I started my senior design project, and we had the opportunity to explore this further. And we had a series of how might we questions, kind of in line with design thinking. So how might we decrease costs of toilets? How might we make something that's both permanent and mobile, which seems like a bit of an oxymoron, but particularly in kind of transient communities or refugee camps, there's a lot of like political nuance that you sort of have to navigate in terms of you want a toilet to exist, you want it to like work, and you want it to get poop away from people safely, but you also might not have the like legal ability to make like full sewage lines, right? So how can you make something that's permanent enough and mobile enough? And then improving the user experience, right? So just making it so people want to use the toilet and they feel safe and dignified in doing so. Then in ideation form, lots of sketches, lots of prototypes, kind of figuring out what our solution might be. And we landed on this concept of the Safi-Chu toilet, which is an inexpensive mobile toilet intended to reduce oral fecal contamination and the spread of these wash-related diseases. This was our original concept that we came up with in studio. We had this like plastic bidet thing that was inspired by a super soaker, which a little bit aggressive, I'll be honest about that. So that was one element of it. We had this like sit squat seat, which we very much sort of kept over time. We've iterated it a bunch. We have this 3-part drawer system that separates out the different consistencies of waste. So again, looking at waste management people that work in that industry, how might we create systems and services that make their work dignified and safe as well. And then, yeah, having some sort of odor flap to keep all the smell in and flies out. So this was our original concept. It looked like this, nice foam prototype. We presented at our senior capstone. We were very excited. We were like, this is awesome. We designed this great toilet. Great semester, everyone. And then a few months later, this happened, and we were the first all-female team to win the Georgia Tech Inventure Prize competition, which came with $25,000 and a patent. And within 4 weeks of being on stage with the green foam prototype, we were on the ground in Kenya, piloting our toilet with refugees in the Kakuma refugee camp. And so we were working with Somali and South Sudanese refugees, very different cultures, very different hygiene norms. And so that was a true moment where we sort of had to go from theory to practice. We had to figure out a way to get toilets made, enough toilets. We had about 10 toilets made at Georgia Tech. This is in the basement of the College of Design, where we were just pulling ABS plastic on this like manual thermoforming machine to get enough toilets that we could ship to this refugee camp. We shipped it, and somehow it went through customs, which is honestly still a miracle. Then they got to Kenya, and we immediately started having conversations with people, focus groups about like their current sanitation situation, current aspirations. And if you can imagine, we're a bunch of like college kids coming in, talking to people about their bathroom habits. There was a ton of barriers that we had to sort of break through. We had to create a rapport with the community. We had to create trust, particularly with women. Women and sanitation is a really stigmatized area. There's a lot of gender norms and nuances. So I think, as a team of primarily women, we really had to create that area of trust, and that we were actually listening to a lot of the things that they were having to say. And then we actually like installed them, and we had people use them, and we had to iterate a lot on the fly. And this is again sort of staying true to the design thinking, human-centered design process, where originally our sit squat seat was, we thought it was going to be made out of ceramic. Quickly, once like logistics and shipping get involved, as I'm sure many of you all know, ceramic is really heavy, and so that was like not going to be an option. So we were like, this has to be plastic. This 3-part drawer system that we thought was going to be fantastic for separating out waste was really complicated in a refugee camp to build. So we decided to do something similar within a bucket system. So there was a lot of just pivoting, like as we kind of realized the realities of the world and also putting it in front of real people. These are some quick, areas of learnings for us. Obviously, some of them are a little bit more palatable than others, but overall, people were telling us about their general user experience, and this really informed our next steps. I want to particularly highlight the intuitiveness one. We really wanted our toilet to make sense for people who might not have seen toilets before or used toilets before. And this guy in the bottom, he was so excited to be a part of our project, but he was sitting on the toilet backwards. And if you're trying to separate out waste, that's, obviously a problem. So if we were like, okay, we need to figure out a way to mitigate this. So some of our key findings was people really liked that this was improving the odor situation in their toilets, in their households. They liked the improved user experience of the sit squat seat. So you could sort of squat, or you could sit in the squatting position. So you could sort of do both. And then overall interest, eventually they got to the point where they were excited that we were asking them questions and sort of involving them in the process, rather than us just being like, this is what we think you need. So kind of coming out of that experience, we sort of reflected on some of these learnings, and we said, a lot of these pit latrines or holes in the ground that people are using to go to the bathroom, they sort of have this peanut shape. And so people know how to squat over this because it's pretty normal for a lot of these pit latrines. And so we ended up mapping that shape onto the seat as we sort of iterated it further. And this is sort of the current shape of the design. We're still finalizing what it actually looks like. This is us kind of moving into more CNC prototyping and bringing this to be a more aesthetic design in terms of the whole package. And now we're sort of at this place where we have this toolbox of options. So you could have a sit toilet, you could have a squat toilet, you could make it so it's self-contained so that it can be compost based, or it can be something that's water-based, depending on your waste management options in your community. So there's a series of options that this toilet enables so that you can sort of increase your sanitation status over time. And that's the goal that we're sort of working towards now. There's a ton of barriers as it comes, when it comes to having all these parts, but that's sort of the intention of the design where we are today. And then kind of coming out of this idea, we're having this toolbox of options. We moved into another pilot in Zambia. This is the squat version of the toilet. And we worked with a female-headed household, and she was really excited that, the way that this is designed is that it kind of snaps all together. And so you don't have to really have manufacturing or installation experience. So you can be anyone to sort of install your own toilet, and she really enjoyed having that ability. And this is sort of the raised version of it as a sit toilet. Again, we conducted interviews, got feedback, and this is sort of what it looks like now. Again, there's a lot of learnings that we're still incorporating in the final concept, but overall, we sort of synthesized our findings, and we're really excited to share this process of how we've used design thinking in the sanitation space as a way to help proliferate the process further, right, in the sanitation sector, so that it's not continuously a top-down approach. It is very community-based and really listening to the needs of what people are saying. We had a lot of positive stakeholder feedback, which is great. Preparing for larger production, which again, sort of in light of COVID and kind of the realities of the world, that's been a bit delayed, but we are looking at doing a market viability pilot. So sort of getting toilets made, putting them in stores and seeing if A, people identify them as toilets without us being like, look at our toilet. And then B, seeing if people actually pay for them, which is something that people are like, oh yeah, we would definitely pay X amount for this or Y amount for this, but actually seeing if that transaction would happen. So these are things that we're sort of hoping to do in the coming years, or year, hopefully, if things with COVID pan out sooner rather than later. And then, yeah, strengthening multi-sectoral partnerships is basically saying we're helping people talk to each other, which maybe depending if you've worked in development, people are often siloed. So bringing the health people, the sanitation and water people, and the design and engineer people together to actually kind of understand and talk together when we talk about innovation and bringing innovation to the sanitation space. And again, this has all been integral to Wish for Wash in our journey. So again, we have these 3 pillars, and we've, in addition to this product design process that we've sort of been walking through over the past few years, we have a series of other channels that we've sort of built out where, you know, right now we're building out research. I mentioned that we're looking to start publishing information about how we're using design thinking as a tool and approach, you know, that could be useful for others that are working in the sanitation space. For education, we're working, you know, we've worked with various Atlanta schools as well as like community groups. We've done a pilot with Girl Scouts and with the International Rescue Committee, just to get people used to using the design thinking process as it relates to sanitation and the wash sector. So encouraging more people to think that way as more of an iterative approach, and also encouraging more people to think about the wash sector as an interesting sector to get involved in and innovate around. So other projects include in 2017, we worked with Global Growers, which is a resettled refugee organization in Atlanta, and we built this compost toilet for them in one of their urban farms. So kind of looking at the diversity of people in the Atlanta area and sort of the different cultural nuances as it relates to toilets there, and like, you know, how might we create a product that is off-grid, also within code of Atlanta, but also is something that's aspirational for various ethnic groups and user groups in Atlanta. So that was a really interesting project for that. And then for education, we've done a series of these design jams to, again, encourage more people to use design thinking as an approach to solving problems within the space, be it, you know, water efficiency, be it, you know, compost toilets, like how might we create a better compost toilet experience? What about like tiny homes? Tiny home toilets are like a really interesting space to consider as well. So these are sort of different programs that we're starting to build out within Wish for Wash. And yeah, all of this has been centered around human-centered design and design thinking. And I also wanted to flag kind of at the end of this that I've been a part of a really exciting additional project that is related to Wish for Wash, but is its own entity, and it's called Period Futures. And it's basically a playful project that's intended to spark curiosity and conversation around the future of periods. So right now, again, in COVID and in light of everything that's going on in the world, there's a ton of talking about, you know, a lot of darkness and problems, and, you know, particularly as we're talking about hygiene and gender equity, you know, there's a ton of things that are saying, you know, periods don't stop for pandemics, and like, you know, supply chains have been severely impacted by COVID and people aren't getting access to their products and services. So myself, as well as two other incredible product designers and women, we came together actually like a month ago, and we were like, let's talk about the future. Like, let's talk about how we can use this time to build a better, more equitable, sustainable future, particularly as it relates to menstruation. And last week, actually, it's been a couple weeks now, May 28th, we launched this Period Futures project. And it's basically a platform where we're generating provocative concepts, be it, you know, positive provocations or something that, you know, maybe challenges people's norms to, you know, stir up conversations about what could the future really look like and how could we start building that. So these are two of our ideas that we've launched. So this idea of having a leak-free certified, you know, product line or underwear line. So similar to Thinx underwear, if you're familiar with them, but sort of having like a universal standard, right? So how can we create a line of products that relate to the menstrual health space, but also all sort of bodily fluids? Like, what if you just had products that kind of had this leak-free, you know, that was built into them? So, and what would that look like for all people, not maybe, you know, beyond menstruators? And I think that that's an interesting concept that came out of our research. And this DIY maker mobile space was also something interesting too. So what if, in terms of menstrual health education, instead of it being sort of a taboo topic during sex ed class, what if it was something where, you know, you combine it with STEM? People are like, you know, 3D printing their, you know, menstrual cups. So it's something where you can make it customizable and you're learning about yourself and your health, but also something that, you know, is hands-on, and you're not like approaching it in like a stigmatized or like hush-hush way. It's something that's inclusive and something that's hands-on. So these are ideas, again, that came out of our research. We've talked to 40 experts that are doctors and public health practitioners, menstrual health financiers, people who menstruate in general. And we've had a series of great feedback after we launched these on social media. And so we're interested in continuing the conversation, continuing to put out provocations. So if you are interested in getting involved, we're definitely looking to talk with anyone who's interested. So that is an additional component to what I'm doing in the wash space, in addition to Wish for Wash. So with that, I will finish. Thank you all so much.
Awesome. So we'll go ahead and open up the floor to Q&A. If you have some questions for Jasmine, you can go ahead and put them in the chat box. Um, but I was really interested in, like, so what's the foundation? What really started it all for you when you started connecting your activism to your design?
Um, yeah, so I think for me, the moment, my aha moment was sort of that realization that not only does like nearly half the world not have access to a toilet, but that reality disproportionately impacts women because of gender norms, because when girls get their periods and schools don't have toilets or like places to wash your hands, there is a lot of stigma that comes with that, and there's a lot of barriers that come with that. So that really, um, you know, hinders women's ability to like advance economically or, you know, finish school. And particularly, you know, when I like where I was in life, like as a freshman in college, where I was like, oh, I have all these opportunities. Like I'm in college, I'm like learning. And I was like, the fact that people can't come to college because they don't have a toilet, you know, like that's a barrier for them. Like that to me was like, this is my sort of call to action. And so that's why there's been like a gender equity thread through most of our work, just because I do think it is very gendered in terms of the space.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also think it's really tied to obviously cultural institutions and systems that are set up. So
Yeah.
like what kind of cultural research did you guys do before you went into like production? Or was it just like more in the testing phase?
Yeah. So in terms of cultural research, I think there's a number of layers. So for us, when we were in studio, kind of doing our first round of research, it was a lot of just understanding the problem and understanding, you know, why do people openly defecate? Like, why do people? There's a thing called flying toilets where people like basically poop in like a Kroger bag or like a plastic bag and they just like throw it and it's just like, okay, like I'm done with my waste. But then it goes somewhere, obviously, right? Like people sometimes throw it on their roof, and then their roofs will collapse because it's just like covered in poop bags, or they'll like throw it in the river or something. So there's like a lot of like, maybe if you've never seen it, or you know you've always had access to a toilet, it's like this dissonance where you're like, why would someone do that? But like once you get a better reality and a picture of sort of what it's like in these contexts where water isn't prevalent, where disease is prevalent, toilets are like nowhere, you start to get a feel for why people have the behaviors that they do, and then you start to understand, you know, it is going to be a journey, and that, you know, we had conversations in our experience in Kenya, where people were like, you know, I don't believe in using a toilet because, you know, in my faith, like I believe I should go to the bathroom in full view of God, right? And so that was an interesting learning where we're like, of course people want toilets, but then people are like, actually no, like I don't believe in that. Or some people are like, I actually believe I'll catch more diseases from using a toilet, so I probably won't be doing that. So it's this journey of like, how do you meet people where they are, understand their beliefs and their worldviews, but then also understand that there's a big public health implication of like, you know, just having free waste everywhere and like pathogens everywhere. Like how can we create systems that capture that waste in a way that still meets them where they are and like makes sense for their worldview and their beliefs. So I think that that's a nuance that like we thought we understood beforehand, but like we really didn't understand until we were there. And then moving into our next phase of iteration, we continue to like build on that. So this idea of like aspiration. So it's like, cool, you could have one toilet, but if you've seen pictures of flushing toilets, if you know someone with a flushing toilet or a sit toilet and you know what like that is like, you know, this, you know, a compost toilet or a dry toilet that smells bad is probably not what you want. And you're like, I'm just going to wait. I'm going to wait until I can afford a $5,000 like septic system. And maybe if you're making $50 a month, like you might not, you know, ever get there, but it's something in your head where you're like, I'm not going to waste my time with this thing that is like lesser than this, you know, other thing I've seen. So this idea of like, how can you create something that's approachable in terms of cost, but also aspirational in terms of like user experience and like, you know, perceived value.
Right, right. So obviously being a female is such a huge part of, like, you have a whole female team and you're working in the women's realm a lot, but do you find it challenging to be a woman working in STEM and as a designer?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think, yes, I think that there's, you know, there's a ton of barriers for women in general. But I do think one of the barriers that I've seen for us at least is this lens of sort of, we know what works, or you know, traditionally a lot of WASH, you know, innovators are predominantly male, predominantly white, predominantly Western, that kind of have this frame of like, we know what works, because like we do in the US, there's things that work and we sort of know that to be true, even though there's a case for improved innovation there as well. But in terms of like, you know, we have a baseline. And so I've had conversations with people being like, why are you spending so much time creating something new when we could just be spending that energy on like scaling up what we know works? And you know, that nuance of like, but like that doesn't work for everyone. Like just because it works for this community, for this like country, for this, you know, it doesn't work for everyone. And I think that nuance is something that, you know, as it relates to women, as it relates to people of color, as it relates to, you know, people, you know, in different socioeconomic statuses, like that's a challenge that I find myself sort of championing in a lot of spaces, because it is, you know, you have to divert resources. And it's like, if people are like, we only have X amount of resources, why don't we just scale up what we know? It's like, you could spend millions of dollars on what you know, but if no one knows what it is, then it's just a waste of money. So I think that that's been a challenge. And also, you know, being the one that like says those things, sometimes people are like, you know, the only woman in the room is saying these like controversial, challenging things. And so I think that's been interesting to navigate as well. And also identifying, you know, sponsors and mentors that help, you know, me in my journey as well has been critical.
Yeah, that's amazing. What other inventions are you looking at right now that you're like really excited about? I know you mentioned a lot of these iterations of the different kinds of toilets that you guys researched before you started prototyping your own, but in the realm of like empathic design, what are you excited about right now?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think kind of as we look at COVID right now, I mean, obviously it's disrupted like everything, but I think it also has given us a baseline for like what could be and how we could um, rethink the way that our, you know, our health systems and our sanitation systems work. There's a whole sort of community of people that are working around this idea of smart sanitation and what that looks like. So, you know, what if public toilets had like biosensors for early, you know, to detect like early signs of, you know, a disease before it became a pandemic, right? There's, you know, biosensors for cholera and things like influenza. You know, there could be a case for like, you know, what if this was something in our sewers for COVID? Like it's something that where you can make like evidence-based decisions in a preventative way. And I think that there's a ton of opportunities related to health that like sanitation products provide. It is a fine line of like making sure that if this, and there seems to be a ton of momentum and like money that's going this direction, and it is really exciting. But I do think like it's again, going back to my like social inclusion lens, making sure that it's like compliant, ethical, you know, like if it's in the US, it's like following HIPAA standards. It's not like just getting people's health data from their toilets and being like, oh, I like know everything about you. Making sure that if it's going to happen, that it's going to happen in a safe way, that people sort of know what's happening with their data. So I'm really excited by that. And I think it'll be really powerful to see if, you know, the momentum continues. But again, I think it'll be important to have that lens of like protection as well.
So Laura asks, what did you learn in school that really helped you on this path? And what have you learned since you graduated that has been the most valuable?
Yeah. So I mean, I think in school, you know, I've learned in school, like design thinking, I think is like my like number one lesson. Like I think product design is always going to be a part of my story, but I think like the way like approaching problems with this lens of generative learning and like listening to people and being empathic, and you know, if people present an idea or concept that's foreign or like that I personally don't align with or I think is gross, like trying to understand why they think that, I think has been a really big value to Wish for Wash and our team at, you know, in terms of the way that we approach problems. And I also just think like now at this point, I sort of live my life that way where it's like, let me just like continue iterating. Like, I didn't know this, but let me like talk to a bunch of people and then kind of, you know, reframe that, you know, concept or idea of my personal life. So I think design thinking is really sort of central to just how I move through the world at this point. And then since graduation, I think, you know, when you graduate, you sort of have this lens of like, you know, design, and I still believe this, design is optimistic. Design has the power to change the world. Design is future oriented, it's generative, and it's fun. It's a fun process. And I think when you invite people into that conversation, it's productive and it's positive often, even if you're talking about really heavy, you know, or gross things. But I do think too, like, to have effective design and effective design conversations, there's an ecosystem, which I wasn't fully aware of, ecosystem in terms of supply chains, in terms of like legal systems, like what legal entities, and like patenting, and like I mentioned, getting toilets through customs. Like, I am still so shocked that happened, because we had no idea what we were doing. And like, I think just understanding that, like, you create things, but then it has to exist in the world. And so like, how can you make it exist in the world in a way that will like have the largest impact possible? I think that's been my biggest learning since college.
So how do you help people get past the stigma of the subject matter? There must be like a bit of a barrier. So how do you get people to really empathize with the issue?
Yeah. I mean, I think first, it depends on the culture. Like, I know in some cultures, there's like talking about sanitation is like really like terrible. Like, people will not, they get very offended. And particularly talking about sanitation as a woman, it's like even more like, so if I were to just go in and just have these conversations, even if I'm like super animated and fun sounding, it would like off put like everyone immediately. And I mean, even here, like in Atlanta, like I've like had to like learn how to bring it up in ways that it's like, oh, that makes sense, or like making people feel comfortable, because I recognize at this point I'm sort of like inundated with sanitation conversations, so I perhaps don't think things are gross when other people do. So I think it's definitely a journey where you sort of open it slowly. I think what's cool about sanitation is that it literally touches everything, like everything. I mean, this is like water, sanitation, and hygiene. Like, you have to have water to live. Everybody excretes waste. Like, that's just a fact. How you do it, where you do it, like, your safety and the things that come with it, like, that's where, the deviation comes. But I think the overarching sense, like when you tell a story and you're like, oh my gosh, I really had to go to the bathroom and there was no toilet, and that feeling of like angst, like that's like a universally understood feeling. Like, people get that. Or like, if something happens that's embarrassing, like people get that too. Like, there's like, in the feeling of disgust, like if you see like poop on the sidewalk and you're like, oh my, that's disgusting. Like, again, that's a universal feeling. Even if your whole community openly defecates, it's not like you're like, oh, that's cool. You're like, oh no, that's disgusting. So I think like that like human connection, regardless of who you are, where you're from, what your culture is, I think that's like what the call to action is like, this is literally all of us. So like, let's just talk about it, because we all do it and it all touches us. And then also bringing it back home. So I know like a lot of times in Atlanta, people will be like, oh, you've done so much cool work, like over there, like abroad or whatever. But it's like, there's so much work to be done here. Atlanta homeless populations, there's a ton of open defecation here. So like, let's talk about that. And like, that also makes people feel, when you're like, this touches my home. Like, it's not just a far away problem. Like, it's something that impacts me immediately now.
So Susan asks, have you had success with funding from foundations for the Safi project or Wish for Wash? And are there foundations who are interested in sanitation and hygiene?
Yeah, so we've had yes, so we've had some like small grants over the years, and we've done some crowdfunding, and we had some money from Georgia Tech, and I am right now bootstrapping as we sort of figure out our next steps. Actually, at the end of last year, we sort of created a two-prong approach. So we've been an LLC for the past 5 years, and now we created a sister company that is a nonprofit. And so we're still like doing it's a ton of paperwork, doing all the paperwork. So getting all of that sorted. Then I'm hopeful at that point we'll sort of be able to apply for some of these larger grants so that we can build out our like education and our research programming, as well as our design work. Most of our design work is going to be housed in our LLC, which was sort of the way that we wanted it, in case that there's an opportunity to license or do something that then could feed into our nonprofit to sort of help us bring up the next generation of diverse wash practitioners. So that's sort of what we have in mind now. We haven't secured any large grants at this point, but that's what we're gearing up for, hopefully by the end of this year.
So just bringing it back to talking about Atlanta and home base, can you talk more about the issue of those experiencing homelessness in Atlanta and how advocates can help address that problem?
Yeah. So homelessness in Atlanta, there's been a ton of really interesting work that's been happening, also kind of in light of COVID, where you sort of see this collective realization and call to action to show up for the homeless population, and to recognize that, you know, when the whole world is saying wash your hands, if you don't have a place to wash your hands, then what are you supposed to do? Like, you just get COVID? Like, is that like your only option? You know, so I feel like that has been a cool thing to see, where people are like, oh, this is actually not something that's universally available in my city, not even just globally, like here in Atlanta. So Love Beyond Walls is a nonprofit based in Atlanta. They do a lot of homeless advocacy and work. And they created like a sink campaign where they put out public sinks, that, off-grid public sinks that, you know, anyone could just wash their hands, which I think is a fantastic way to sort of represent like what is needed in terms of like equity, health equity, because again, like, diseases don't discriminate. Like, if you don't protect the most marginalized populations, like, you're, you know, it's ultimately going to affect you and your livelihood and your health as well. So it is something that's advantageous for everyone to care about. And it's also something where, if you just think about the human dignity side of it, like, you know, hand washing is one component, but then also like open defecation, like I mentioned, the fact that Georgia Tech actually put out a paper, I think last year or 2 years ago, analyzing open defecation and prevalence in Atlanta, and just like seeing how big of an issue it is. Because if you just think about, you know, where are the public toilets? Like, if you were on a run in the city, like, where would you go if you really had to go? You know, and then I think those are things where there's a ton of opportunity to design around, to innovate around, to advocate for policy, more inclusive policy around, just to make it, you know, equitable for everyone, but also so that it's protecting the health of our city.
Yeah, and I think, you know, just thinking about the public toilet issue, it's gotten even worse since COVID, because a lot of times there are places that did have public restrooms are shutting those down and not allowing access.
Yeah.
So yeah, I
Yeah.
think that's super poignant, especially right now.
Yeah. And I think too, there's like under the radar, I guess, people that work in like the gig economy as well. So like, if you're a Uber driver and that's like your main source of income, like, where is your bathroom? You know, and like, there's been like case studies where people are like, oh, you know, my Uber driver asked to like come in my house to like go to the bathroom. And like, I mean, obviously, like, that's like a strange interaction, but like, also it's like, I guess, like, where else are you going to go? And so I think like seeing like, how can we create, like, now that we know that, you know, this is a big, you know, the gig economy is big. A lot of people are freelance workers. A lot of people are, you know, kind of operating in this like, you know, not traditional sort of way that, you know, people used to work. Like, how can we make sure that they still have, you know, the same access that, you know, you would have if you had, you know, worked at a corporate job. So I think that that's like a nuance that there's also a lot of opportunity as well.
Was there one or two learning moments during the Softtree project that you have taken on to your current work?
Um, yeah, so I mean, I think, yeah, a lot. I feel like most of the Savitri, like, I feel like I grew up and I'm still growing up like with the Savitri project. Like, we're just like kind of like twins at this point. Just because it's like, I feel like when I learn stuff, you know, we try to integrate it into the product or into the company. And I mean, I think in general, so my day job right now is at the CDC, which has also been fascinating, considering everything. But I think like that lens, again, going back to design thinking, like when you're working within, you know, Wish for Wash was sort of, we just did stuff. We made stuff, and we like kind of made systems and structures and business around it. Versus like, if you're working in an institution, like, what are your opportunities to create, innovate, and drive change? And I think, you know, I'm still learning what that is, but I do think that there's a ton of opportunity to, you know, start that conversation. And so that's what I've been able to do in my role at CDC. I work a lot in communications and policy. And so it's like, if we're trying to get Congress to understand the implications of global health security, which is exactly related to COVID, if that's what we're advocating for and we want Congress to continue financing it, how do we make that message land? You know, research is like amazing. If you're a public health researcher and you're like, I want to read all these like stats, like, that's great. Like, I love it, but like, that's not for everyone. We have to be able to communicate that effectively in a way that like makes sense for the user, which are politicians. And like, I think sometimes like people get so into their research, which again, I totally understand, it doesn't resonate with the end user. So it's like, how might we like kind of create better processes and ways of communicating so that it is quick and effective for the intended user?
So what advice do you have for designers like you who have a really big visionary idea and don't know how to start realizing it?
Yeah. I mean, I think especially if you want to work in the impact space, it's like super daunting. Just when you look at the number of problems that exist in the world, like you're like, first of all, like, for me, toilet sort of came to me as like, this is inspiration. But like, if you're like, I just want to do something in the impact space, there's so many different problems that you can seek to address. And I think sometimes people get overwhelmed by that. And then I think sometimes people get overwhelmed with um, just the number of things that haven't worked in the past. I would reframe that. I would encourage reframing. And I think, again, that's the power of design. Like you can reframe problems into opportunities, right? So if we look at what's failed, like really like authentically, like, this did not work, creating steps, like helping with steps. It doesn't, you're not trying to save lives. And this is what I've like had to navigate this for my career when people are like, Jasmine is saving lives. And I'm like, I'm like helping drive change. Like like helping like step by step, but I personally am not like saving lives. And I think that's an important thing because especially in the impact space, I think sometimes people are like, oh my gosh, I'm not doing enough. It's not a big enough impact. This is not a far enough reach. Every step matters. And especially if you're staying true to like the design thinking process, if you're staying true to communicating failures, which I also think that's a barrier for a lot of people where people are like, I just want to talk about success, but then everyone has the same failures and there's like no progress. So you have to be like, this actually didn't work. So everyone know that it didn't work. So don't do it again. So I think that is something that I would encourage if you're looking to work in the impact space, realize that every step, even if it's super small to you, is an important one. And then staying transparent and honest, as well as just listening to your user is just like crucial.
Well, does anyone else have any questions? All right. Well, thank you so much, Jasmine. I really, really appreciate you talking with us this evening. If you'd like to support Wish for Wash, you can donate at wishforwashthanks.org. Jasmine, how else can anybody support you?
Yeah, so we're always looking for people to get involved. So if you're just keen on like getting involved, let me know. Again, we're sort of pivoting and figuring out what we're doing kind of in light of COVID, but yeah, we'd love to hear from you all. And then also kind of going back to Period Futures, which is a different initiative, but related to this. If you're interested in talking about the future of periods, innovating and creating around that, our like call to action, like we're really keen on getting more creatives in the conversation, just because if you're strictly looking at products in the menstrual health space, products that exist for menstrual health collect and absorb, and that's about it. That's like the level of innovation that exists. And I think we could do better. Like I know we can do better. And we have a ton of provocations that have come from research that sort of challenge that. So we would invite you to join us in that journey. And if you're interested, yeah, definitely reach out.
Awesome. I think we actually have one question from Sean. Sean, are you able to unmute yourself? Let me see if I can help you out here.
Unmute myself.
Oh, there you are. You're good.
Oh, so you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Hey.
Okay, cool. Hey, how you guys doing?
Good. How are you?
Good, great. Listen, I want to ask more about your job at the CDC. Do you have any insights about what's going on right now with COVID that we may not know out here in the public?
Yeah. Okay. So I'll preface this by saying it's amazing. Like I've been working for CDC for 2 years now. I'm a contractor. Everyone like thinks I'm all of a sudden like in charge. Like my parents saw like the director of the CDC on TV and they're like, do you know him? Do you work directly with him? I'm like, no, like I'm not like that important. But so I'll say that, like I'm not that important within the system. But what I do know about COVID is it is not going away anytime soon, or that's what people are saying. Like it's something we're definitely going to be in for the long haul. So a lot of the people I work with are actively on response. Unless something happens in terms of vaccine, like that, makes the vaccine like more readily available quicker. It is something that I think is going to be around at least for another year. And
Wow.
what I think, I mean, in terms of the impact and the numbers and the like mortality and stuff, like I do think like that is not going to be as big as it has been. Like I think, it's possible that waves will come. But I think like our first big one sort of hit first. And hopefully kind of now with all the public health messaging and norms, we will prevent that. But I do think, again, as like creatives and designers, knowing that this is probably going to be something that exists in sort of a, you know, like uncertain reality for a kind of
Yeah.
long time. Yeah, like there's a ton of things that we can do to create a better space to make people feel more comfortable living their lives. Like, I don't know, coming out of quarantine and then interacting with friends and you like want to hug them, but you're like, can I hug you? I don't know. Like, it's like this weird like world we're in.
It
Like,
is. It
like
is.
there's a ton of things that we're like, let's explore what could exist to like continue creating like human interaction during these like strange times. So yeah.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, and I see someone was asking about how to get in touch. So yeah, I am at jasminekburton@gmail.com. So I can put this in the chat as well if you want to reach out. But yeah, I'm
Go
really
ahead and
excited.
send out an email with your
Oh, okay.
email address in and after the event.
Oh,
If
perfect.
that's fine with you, and we can share it with anybody who wants to get in touch with you.
Awesome.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. I really, really appreciate you talking with us. Also, thanks to all of you for joining us this evening. We're teaching a ton of online classes and camps to kids who are schooling from home, but not every family can afford those classes, especially right now. So if you want to help some kids learn about design, you can head on over to our website at museumofdesign.org. A donation of $20 creates a scholarship for a child whose family is experiencing some financial difficulty right now. Also, we'd love for you to become a part of our community. Thank you to all of you who are already MODA members. But if you're not a MODA member, we are offering 25% off of all annual memberships to Drink and Design attendees. So I'll send you all the email. I'll send you all an email regarding that promotion in the next couple days. We also have another Drink and Design coming up tomorrow. And that will be with the guys from the squirrel census. So they count squirrels in Atlanta and in New York and in a few places, and they'll talk to you all about why and how. So thanks again, and we hope to see you at the next one.
Thanks so much.
Bye, everybody.